Good to get started.
Perfect. All right, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. My name is Shoaib. For those of you that don't know me, I am the manager for the CDW National Startups and Small Business team. I really appreciate all of our customers joining us here today and joining us here for this webinar. I think we're going to get a lot of value out of it, and we're extremely excited to be talking about and working with our partner Microsoft in delivering this presentation to you and really delivering this webinar to you as well. I'm going to quickly, briefly, just kind of go over our story a little bit. You know, the startups team, it is year 4 since our inception here within CDW Canada. All the work that we've done, and especially what we plan to do moving forward with you, and how we can really work together in this emerging cloud market that has really kind of matured now, but again, more and more customers we see are trying to build towards it. So again, in terms of today, I'll quickly give a brief introduction, talk a little bit just about the current market in terms of startups for cloud and what we're seeing in the market right now. And then from there, I'm going to pass it over to our celebrity here today, Andy Jennings, who is our CDW Field Solution Architect for our cloud practice, and one of our leading architects that has actually, I think, with some of the customers on the line today, spoken with a couple of you as well. So really looking forward to hearing Andy's best practices as well. So we get the unique challenges that are facing startups. At the end of the day, we used to be one ourselves. And I understand that some of our customers on the line here today are in different phases. You may be in the scale-up phase, you may be in the growth phase, you may be just emerging as well. Well, whether your startup is just still proving market fit, or your business is working on securing a next round of funding to propel your business even further, what's essential for your business is having the right technology solutions that can help you meet those growth needs. CDW Canada is ready to be your technology advocate and help with that, and really help you find the right combination of technologies that can balance what you need to go to market and help with your growing operations. Since inception, we've gone from, on our team specifically, we've gone from a handful of account managers to over almost 50 now, working all across the country in multiple different regions. We're there to help, and we want to make sure that we have that breadth of knowledge and that breadth of expertise within our bench to be able to help you with any of your cloud needs. So what are some of the trends that we've seen? Now, I won't spend too much time on this because we have an expert coming up right after me, but what are some of the trends that we've seen? In fact, it's funny because some of our customers are probably living through, that are on the line right now, you're living through these trends. There's a very good chance that you use cloud-based applications, or the value that you give to your customer is through cloud-based applications yourself. So we're fully in tune with that, and we understand just how important having that cloud environment and having the right cloud environment is for your organization and is for your customers in many of your cases as well. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. We have Andy Jennings, as I mentioned, who's going to in detail talk about our best practices and go over a lot of information that we believe will definitely be of worth. Now, I also want to just quickly add, if you have any questions in between while Andy is presenting, he'll pause to take any questions, or feel free to write them in the chat and we'll make sure to address them. I also want to thank everyone for joining today. Everyone that joined today, of course, there's a gift card for all of you that will be sent out. And then on top of that, what we will also do is for all of our customers that were able to join, we're going to do a raffle afterwards with the names that we have compiled here. And we will be reaching out to one individual customer that will be a winner of a half day of Azure consulting with Andy as well. So again, really appreciate all of you joining us here today. Thank you all. And I'm going to, with that, pass the floor off to Andy. Andy, the floor is yours.
Andy, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Man, you think you know how to use technology. But anyway. Hey, well, thanks again for joining, everyone. Just a little bit about myself. I just wanted to give you some background on me. So I've been working with Microsoft Azure for, wow, 10 years now, I guess. And I started working with Azure in 2011. It was really bad back then. Just a bit of a background if anybody remembers it back then. But it's grown leaps and bounds, and it is one of the premier, as you know, cloud engines out there today. But again, so I've been, I worked at Microsoft selling Azure, or working with the Azure team for 8 years. So I'm pretty well versed in it. And this is one of my favorite topics, to be perfectly honest. So Azure governance, customers tend to skim over this. And this is my experience with clients, right? So there's a lot of governance requirements that are happening in the cloud. We need to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of the things that the cloud provider provides for you to help control your environment, right? So I've seen clients jump right into the cloud and then just explode their budget. I've got people jumped into the cloud and not secured it correctly. There's a whole host of things. I've had one customer who had every user in their organization had administrative rights to their cloud environment, right? So a million things happen. It's one of those things that you really need to dig into and make sure that you're taking, like, as I said, taking advantage of all of the tools that are available to you to help that governance. So here's the agenda. So what we're going to do is go over the Azure governance model and give you an idea what the framework is for governance in Azure. Then we'll talk a bit about a base deployment, how you're actually setting up your Azure deployment itself. And then we'll talk some operational excellence, how you're monitoring that environment moving forward in that environment, what the networking security models are, or connectivity models are. Look a little bit at the edge security, talk some security and identity, and then cost monitoring and billing, which is, in my mind, is a big feature, especially when we're dealing with cloud, right? We want to make sure we're, keeping those costs in line, right? The budget's only so big. We have to keep it inside that budget. Okay, so let's talk about Azure governance. So this is the Azure governance model, comes from Microsoft, right? So a lot of people, well, as I said before, focus on what you see here as the core, right? So that's my SQL servers and my Windows and my Linux boxes and my web apps and all of those things that I'm building, right? But Microsoft provides this model for governance, which is basically surrounding your core, right? So the idea here is we need to apply security to your systems. We need to, modify the identity and access to it, monitor and alert against things that are happening in your environment, because they're no longer live in your environment anymore, right? They're in the cloud. So we need to be able to understand what's going on in the cloud. Again, cost management, huge issue. We want to know how we can automate things, right? So do we want to automate deployments? Do we want to do CI/CD pipelines? Are we going to template our environment using DevOps, right? And then there's certain things that people don't really think about, right? Is how do I set up the actual subscription itself, right? So how am I managing that? Am I managing it with multiple subscriptions? Am I managing with a single subscription and breaking it down? We'll get into each one of these. I'm just highlighting them. One of the things that's very key as well is naming standards. Once you start deploying in the cloud, especially in a hybrid environment, we want to make sure that we're identifying whether those systems are actually living in the cloud or living on premises, or they're for a certain type of application, that type of thing. So we want to make sure that that's something that is really thought through as naming standards, so we can actually find the actual item that we're trying to look for, right? And then policies, you can see on the far left. Policies are huge, and a lot of people don't really know what policies are available. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So this is the actual framework that you want to build around your core, right? You want to make sure you're using all of these components to enhance the actual deployment of Azure. I will take questions after the end of this section, if that makes sense, or you can post them in the chat and people can read them back. Okay, so let's talk about base deployment, and really we're talking here about the hierarchy of your subscription. Right? So do I have an enterprise enrollment? Do I not have an enterprise enrollment? How am I going to break down my subscriptions? Am I going to have a subscription for dev and test? Am I going to have a production subscription? Am I going to have that all combined into one subscription? Excuse me, and then manage it by resource group? How am I going to apply security to those? How many service accounts do I need? How many owner accounts do I need? People who can actually do deep modification of the Azure environment. As I said before, I had one client who everybody had that right. So the whole directory had access to do whatever they really wanted to inside the environment. And so we need to really think that out and leverage the rules engine that's part of Azure to ensure that we're giving the people only the access they need to have access to, right? But again, this is a big thing about whether or not you want your dev test environment totally separate from your production environment. And there's some good reasons for that, right? So one of the reasons, if you stand up a dev test environment, Microsoft provides you a break on the Microsoft software licensing, right? So you can use the Microsoft software, like for example, Windows and SQL and web apps and things like that at a mostly very reduced rate. So in reality, with SQL and with Windows, they charge nothing for the license for those in a dev test environment, right? You only have to pay for that in production. So again, bringing it all back to cost, right? So we need to understand how you want to actually deploy your environment, who the owners of your environment are, and then how you're going to secure it, right? That's really all about setting up the hierarchy and the subscription model in Azure. So we talk about role-based access in the previous slide. So basically, we need to understand what the scope of access that people need for to do their job, right? So as you'll see here, you'll see that there's contributors, there's owners, and there's readers. That's really the basis for when you're giving access to Azure, right? So an owner has the right to do pretty much everything that's available in Azure. Add new users, remove users, all of that, right? Where a contributor has the ability to work within the boundaries that the owner has created, right? And pretty much they have most of the rights, but they really can't add and remove users from the Azure environment, right? So, but they can do everything else. And that's where we need to think about, okay, where are we going to assign the rights to these people, right? So do we assign them at the top of the subscription where they get inheritance all the way down to the bottom? Or are we going to control them based on what resources they really need to be assigned to? So in that particular case, we'd assign them, rather than this subscription level, we'd assign them to a resource group level. And then they have the ability to do whatever they need to do, whatever the apps they need to deploy, networking, all of that stuff, they can do it within their resource group. And that's their fiefdom, shall we say, right? And then anybody else in the environment, you either want to give them reader access, and then that way they basically just have the ability to view within the environment, or you give them nothing, right? And there's one thing here that I want to make clear. I had a customer call me the other day, and while Azure uses Azure Active Directory as its authentication store, having global admin access to your Office 365 environment basically gives you no access to Azure. Okay, so I want you to think about that. So the global admin is really designed to manage Azure Active Directory, right? It's not designed to manage roles within Azure itself, right? There has a totally separate engine that you use to actually apply RBAC rules to users within Azure. Now, some of you guys might be well down this road and understand this, but we want, like I said, I've had customers call me and feel that, you know, they have full access, they should have full access, but they don't, right? And there's one other role that I wanted to mention. It's the service admin role. So the service admin is basically God role, right? So only one person can have service admin, and normally it's the person who stands up the subscription, okay? And that person has the ability to transfer the subscription ownership to another person and also transfer the billing components as well. So that only that service admin has the ability to do that. So I want to make sure you guys are clear on that. And then so one of the nice things about Azure is it tracks everything that's going on inside the environment, and so you can actually leverage it to do audits against any changes that are happening in your environment based on adding or roles to users or removing roles from users. So resource groups. So this is where we actually do the work, right? So resource groups are a logical area of where all of your resources reside. Okay, so a lot of people break this up in multiple ways. Some people put all of the components that are required for their app in a single resource group, so that everything lives there, right? So whenever they want to monitor an application or go in and make a change, it lives in that resource group, so it's very easy to find. Other people break it down to, hey, I want to have all my networking resources live in a networking resource group, right? So one of those things that you want to make a choice of that. So the way I break down an environment is I break it down by the actual tool that's being used. So I will have my web apps resource group, and all my web apps will live in there. And then I will have a SQL resource group, and all my SQL resources will live in there. And then that way I can control who has access to what. Because a lot of times, you know, your web developer is not a SQL developer or SQL DBA, right? So we want to make sure that the DBAs have access to what they need access to, and we want to make sure that the developers have access to what they have access to. And that's the way I think it through, right? And then I want to isolate my networking environment so that my networking guys live in there, right? And that's just the way I break it down. Other people, as I said, just put everything into the one resource group moving forward, right? But the idea is that basically you want to limit how people access resources within Azure. So certain groups may, you know, you want to keep them out of certain areas, and that's the intent here with using resource groups in that manner. So policies. This is a big one for me that I feel that customers skim over this, and it's an incredibly important part of Azure. So Azure has a policy engine built into it, and it gives you the ability to control what can be done within Azure. So the first thing that I think of is my brain is always on cost control for cloud, because it's been drilled into me from customers over the years that Azure costs too much, right? It's too much, and it's not, right? So I want to use a policy to stop people from deploying crazy large virtual machines, for example, right? So you could have, there's virtual machines in Azure that go from $26 a month, I think that's the lowest one now, to $37,000 a month, right? So as we know, people like to use the best and fastest equipment, right? But then in Azure, it makes it very simple to do that. So I can go in and deploy a 128 core, 4.5 terabyte virtual machine at $37,000 a month, and it will deploy it if you have the rights to do it, right? So it'll just do it, and then hopefully somebody will catch it if that's not something that you want. But what you want to do is build a policy in your environment to actually stop that from happening in the first place, right? So basically, the first one I go into is I go in and figure out which SKUs that I really want access to, right? And then I turn off everything else. This is totally adjustable, right? You can go back in and modify the policy at any time. However, you basically want to start by locking off the systems that you know you're never going to use, right? Most clients of mine, after we've gone through the policy engine, we end up with 3 or 4 virtual machines that are really the core of what they're going to use in the virtual machine world, right? So it's like a 2x8, 8x16, a 16x32, and a 32x64, really. And the 32x64 is really for heavy SQL use, right? Or heavy database. But otherwise, all the other, I'm going to say, 296 virtual machine types that are available in Azure are turned off, right? If perhaps we find that we need one of these, we go in and modify the policy and allow it to happen, right? So that's a big thing to help control the costs in Azure. The other thing is, in Canada, I hear this all the time, and it's about data residency, right? What can I have only my stuff stored in Canada? And then that's absolutely possible, absolutely, right? But the problem is that, as we know, Microsoft is very US focused at their base. So when you deploy a resource in Azure, it automatically defaults to US East or US West, depending on the resource. So you have to make sure that you go in and change that to Canada, right? You have to make sure that change happens. So to avoid having a problem, because basically if you go in and do the next, build VM, build service, build a storage array, the next get you US, right? So you have to make sure that there's a stopgap in there somehow, right? Because we've all done it, and everybody on this call who's ever installed something has done the next, right? And then you have to back out sometimes, right? So what we do is we build a policy that says you are not allowed to build any resources in any other data center than Canada East or Canada Central, right? That's it. It will not allow the creation of that resource. So you've basically eliminated the issue of data residency by creating this policy that will basically fail the install of the resource right away. It'll basically say that it's not possible because of this policy, right? And you fail, right? So these things are really, really powerful. And we want to make sure that we're working with you because there's dozens and dozens of built-in policies, excuse me, in Azure, but you can also create your own, right? And as you can see from this JSON script here, you basically have the ability to actually build your own policies as you go forward. So customizing your Azure environment as you move forward. Very, very, very important to deal with these. Next thing is tagging. So tagging is just putting metadata against resources that you've deployed in Azure. So it could be, for example, for a cost center, right? So we want to make sure that this item is tagged to a certain cost center. so that when we're doing reporting, we can just easily pull out that cost center and see exactly what is going on for that particular. For example, you're deployed a finance app, and you basically want to know how much that app is costing you. And so you want to present that back to finance and say, hey, this is how much it does cost, just so you're aware. You know, if you want to make any changes, the cost will change, right? That type of thing. So we want to identify all of these items by tag, and that makes it much easier to actually find those resources and apply basically cost controls, or you know, even if you're going through your environment and you've set it up in a manner that that I discussed, where you have your SQL in one resource group and you have your networking in another, you can actually assign tags across these resource groups so that when you do run a report, you can actually pull all of those things together and they're basically right in front of you, not having to move around throughout multiple resource groups, right? So it's very, very easy to actually find items using tagging and actually work with them that way. Very, very useful tool. This is one that almost nobody I talk to knows is available. And this one's a really, really important. So there's the ability to go to any resource and lock that resource. So as you can see on the side, cannot delete or make it read-only, right? And you can basically create scopes and then add them that lock, and then things inside that scope will actually inherit that lock, right? And so I'll give you an example of applying why you would apply a lock. Well, two maybe, but the first one, and I've seen this happen, someone went into Azure, was looking at their SQL server, clicked the wrong thing and said yes, and their SQL server was gone, right? So remember, Azure's going to do what you ask it to do, right? So basically want to make sure that you don't do that, right? So the idea here is that you basically go in and add a lock onto that SQL server, and it would pop up a window saying this resource is locked, and only the person who set the lock or a person with a high enough permission can go in and remove the lock. And so it'll say, hey, this resource is locked to read only. You can't do anything here. If you want to make a change, you have to go and remove the lock first and then come back here, right? Which makes it, you know, a multiple step process. So you don't get into that situation where, you know, you just click next again, because it just says okay, and you click okay, and then it smokes that resource, right? Say, for example, you're doing that for your firewall that's running, like you have basically a PAN firewall running in Azure, and all of a sudden somebody goes in and deletes it, right? Not a good day, right? So unless your backups are solid, you know, that's really, really bad news, right? So that's the end of that first section. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Andy, I'll ask away over here. So first question was, how about companies in British Columbia? There is no data center in Western Canada. It ends up defaulting to the US. So I am going to ask, I believe that was Ali, if you want to unmute and maybe add a little bit more context to that question, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Yep. So hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm just working with CDW to integrate Azure services in our environment. And then it's kind of like when I try to enable the services, it defaults to, I believe, Redmond, the Washington State data center.
Mm-hmm.
So how that's going to work? So I have to switch to, you said Canada Central or Canada East?
So I'll put this out there to get you all thinking, but stay tuned for BC. And right now it's Canada Central and Canada East, which is in Quebec City. So you definitely, the default is, like I said before, is always US. You have to change it, right? You have to force the change. And so basically it's just a drop down box and you just basically pick Canada Central, which is Toronto, right? But you have to make sure you can handle the latency, right? There's definitely latency coming across the country, right? It's much faster to go to the Washington data centers from Vancouver than it is to come to Toronto, right? So for sure, but those are there's testing you can do for all that to make sure that the latency is within your boundary. But yeah, for sure, like I said, you want to build your policy to say Canada only, and then basically it'll stop you from deploying in US West.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is that it? Continue.
I believe that was it for now. But if there are any other questions, again, feel free to ask in the chat, and we'll definitely take some time to pause away and ask for them.
Awesome. Yeah, so now I just want to talk a little bit about operational excellence, right? So this is really how you're managing your Azure environment, right? So that's one of the things that we need to think about as we move forward into the cloud, right? So the first thing we want to talk about is monitoring and alerting. And there's a lot of tooling inside Azure to help you with this, right? So we'll talk about all the dashboards that are available. We can explore like metrics. If we're gathering metrics, that's one of the things we want to talk about as well, is the ability to actually turn these things on and off, right? So you don't have to have all of these features running, but you really kind of, depending on your environment, you really want most of these features running so that you can have the background and you can quickly find and resolve an issue, right? That's really what this is all about, right? So let's start at the bottom. So we have alerting and dashboards, right? So with the alerting engine really runs off of Azure Monitor, and then you're monitoring certain components within the Azure environment, and then writing rules that basically will alert based on something that's happened to that particular service that you're running, right? So say, for example, you see a virtual machine that's sitting at 100% CPU for more than, I don't know, 3 minutes, for example. That's probably a problem because every machine goes to 100%, right? You can't write a rule that says, hey, when my machine goes to 100%, then, alert me, because then you'll be getting alerted all the time, right? So you want to make sure you build the alert that makes sense to your environment, right? And then we have like dashboards that we can look at, like our, security center and other dashboards and advisor and things like that are actually, a high level view of what's going on in your environment, but gives you a really good look at what's going on at a high level, and then you can start drilling in from there. And then the Metrics Explorer is the ability to actually have counters running against your systems, and then we can actually start running reports against what's going on with those metrics. Like, say, for example, you're in Azure, you're not really sure that you have your systems running in an optimal fashion, right? So say, for example, some of your Azure machines are running at maybe 20% utilization, and that's not a good place to be in Azure, right? You want to make sure that you're burning up Microsoft's virtual machine or infrastructure, right? So you want to make sure that you're up in the 50%, 60% range on each of your machines, because you're basically renting that machine, right? So if you burn it down, you'll just get a new one, right? So the idea here is you want to understand what the metrics are that are happening to that particular machine, and then it gives you the ability to adjust to right size your environment, right? Then there's the activity log. And so the activity log basically is what has happened over time within my environment. What's been created, what's been deleted, what's been moved, what's been anything that's happened in Azure is in the activity log. So you can basically go in there and say, hey, I know this happened. Now I need to identify who did it, right? So that's where you would go, is the activity log for that, right? Azure Monitor, as I said before, is basically a tool that pulls information from the log analytics and then gives you the ability to actually alert against it, right? Advisor is a tool that actually goes in and looks at your environment, and it's not as granular as you would get with Metrics Explorer, but it's going to tell you, hey, we've noticed that there's some things that aren't right in your environment. Here's a way to actually fix that, right? The service health is really a tool that Microsoft has that's available to everyone. You can actually go, and it's not really inside Azure. It kind of takes you outside Azure and tells you how the Azure services are actually running globally, right? You can drill into each data center, but basically it's a global service that you actually run into, right? So log analytics is the ability to actually take all of the log data from all of the items that you're running inside of Azure, and then you can actually start running queries against this data, right? So it's a database of items that are happening within Azure, so a database of logs, and then you can actually go in and actually run queries against that, right? Network Watcher, as it says, is what it is, right? It basically lets you understand what the outbound data flow, inbound data flow, and data flows between subscriptions are, and gives you a report back on that. Service Maps, super cool tool, and what it does is it actually gives you a view of how all of your Azure resources are interacting, right? So if I have a SQL database and I have 4 or 5 apps that are attached to that database, the service map will identify each of those apps as a separate connection and show you how those items are linked together, right? It's really cool. And then application insights is about understanding what's going on within an application that's deployed, basically a web application that's deployed in Azure. So you deploy a web app in Azure and you apply application insights, and it's going to understand all of the flow of that app, understand the SQL server, understand the front ends, and it's going to pull all that information in and then give you the ability to understand where you can modify your app to make it faster, or if there's any issues that are happening with the app, it will guide you to where the issues are happening. So putting all of these tools together gives you a really good view of what's going on in your environment, and gives you, again, the ability to actually alert on things that are going wrong in the environment, right? So there's very, very powerful tooling within Azure. And obviously there's third-party tooling that you could actually pull in to do this type of thing as well. But as I said, Microsoft has a lot of this built in, and really should be leveraging all of these things that are built into Azure. So we talk about backup and disaster recovery. So I'm going to just say this right out. So there's a whole host of different backup solutions that you can use for Azure. Basically, I talked to the built-in ones, but there's Veeam, there's Commvault, there's all of it's an exhaustive list, right, of backup solutions that are available for you up there. But we're just talking here what's built in. And so Azure Backup is really all about, we all know this, and it's pretty dumb to go over it, but long-term retention, right? So the intent is, if I need to hold data for forever, I need to use a backup tool to actually do that, right? Rather than having just some live data available, you want to park it in long-term retention tool, right? And then when we talk about disaster recovery, this is really Azure Site Recovery is a very, very powerful tool. And what makes it, in my mind, better than some of its competitors is the fact that it understands the networking segments and all of the things that are going on between your on-premises environment, if you're using it for on-premises, and the cloud, right? So basically, when you fail that system over into the cloud, you don't have to recreate everything, right? It basically, it understands what it needs to build, and it will basically build that environment for you and allow you to do a quick failover into the cloud, where sometimes the other systems aren't quite as intelligent, and there's a fair bit of manual work that has to be done to fire those back up and get them working. So that's my pitch for Azure Site Recovery Services. But the use of it is very profound, right? So the beauty here is that you can actually do a test failover of your environment without affecting your environment at all, right? So it's going to fail over whatever it is that you're protecting with site recovery into a sandbox, and then you can determine whether or not the failover worked correctly, right? So you can just go into the sandbox, understand that the apps are talking to the SQL servers and the front ends are working and all of that type of stuff. And then basically, once you're done the test, you just destroy it, right? And it goes back to just replicating the information. It's very, very cool. Also, if you need quick bursts into the cloud to extend your environment, we've been replicating your data into the cloud so you can quickly bring one of those systems online to extend the compute resources for it, right? And it's also very useful as a migration tool from on-premises to the cloud, right? So you can basically set up the replication, make sure that everything is synced correctly, and then basically you can have the ability to actually just fire it up in the cloud and then just set it as migrated, and then it'll disconnect from the on-premises environment. And the beauty of it is that it's non-destructive, right? So your system on premises is still in good shape, right? You just need to shut it down on the other end because you now moved to the cloud, right? But reverting back to the on-premises environment is just turn it off in the cloud and turn it on premises, right? So very, very easy way to do a migration to the cloud. So you can set it up so that you can have deployment automated as well. So you can use the automation engine in Azure to actually assist with any changes that need to happen when a disaster occurs, right? So you can basically write what's called a disaster plan inside Site Recovery Services, and then it will use the automation engine to make any changes that need to be made to bring that to full bore in production for you, right? It's pretty cool tool. Okay. So any questions about the backup at all? Or?
We do have one question here, Andy. So from George, are all of these services such as Network Watcher, Azure Monitor, and Azure Monitor part of the Azure licenses, or are they individually add-on paid tools?
So the one thing you have to think about with Azure is that they're all part of Azure, but Azure is a consumption-based tool, right? So basically, when you turn on Network Watcher, there's something that you need to pay for, and that's the actual storage space that Network Watcher uses to store the logs, right? And that's the same thing for log analytics. It basically you're just paying for the storage you're using to store those logs, but the tools themselves are no cost to you, right? It's just the actual data storage that you have to pay for.
Thank you.
Cool. So let's talk about what service requirements you guys need, right? That's something that's big, and you know, you want to make sure that when you're building out your environment, that you're actually meeting the SLA the business needs to have this app up and running, right? So we need to talk about SLAs, OLAs, RPO, RTO, all of these things need to be thought through, right? When you're going into the cloud. So how fast can I restore something? How fast or how much data can I afford to lose? Right? Excuse me. What's my uptime requirement? All of those types of things, right? So as you can see, if you stand up a standard Azure VM with standard disk, there is no SLA at all, right? So we want to make sure you guys are aware of that, right? This is something that, again, it's part of the Azure framework. You want to know what our uptime is, right? But if we move to a single VM with premium disk, you get 3 nines, right? Which is pretty good, right? If you set up an availability set, you get 9995, which is like, I don't even know what that is, 15 minutes a year or something like that, some crazy high number. And then if you go into an availability zone, you get 4 nines, right? So we want to think about what it is we're deploying, what our uptime requirements are, and make sure that we're deploying, pardon me, the actual proper setup within Azure to ensure that you're getting that proper uptime, right? And then Microsoft has load balancers that are built in. There's no cost to their load balancers. So you can stand up load balancers in front of these systems, and then you can set it up as round robin, or you can set it up as least used or what have you, so that it's balancing the traffic in your availability zone, right? And then one other thing that people may or may not be aware of is this thing called Traffic Manager. And Traffic Managers is a front end to how can I say this? To the edge of Azure, right? So it sits on the edge, and then it determines whether or not the traffic that has hit Traffic Manager needs to be routed to, say, for example, somebody was hitting your site. Traffic Manager realizes that it's someone from Asia that's actually hitting your site, and you have a site in Asia, so it will actually route that traffic to Asia, and then basically once that connection's established, then that person will get better service, right? So Traffic Manager manages where traffic's coming from, understands that if there's a failure within your environment, and it will know how to reroute your traffic to a system that's still up and available as well, right? Now, and then we talk about Azure backups. So some resiliency options are the ability to have your backups stored in 2 locations, 2 disparate locations, right? So the way Azure Backup works by default is that it backs up your data and then replicates it 3 times within one data center. Okay, that's what's called LRS. But you can set it up so that it's backed up into the primary data center and replicated 3 times, and it's also backed up, or it's also stored 3 times in a totally separate region, right? So in Canada, we have 2 regions, it's Canada Central and Canada East. And the beauty of those 2 regions is, and the reason why Microsoft set them up that way, is that they are on totally separate electricity grids, right? So Quebec, if you remember back in 2003, where Ontario lost all its power, Quebec was up and running without any issue, right? And that's why they've set it up that way. So you could have all your data replicated into the Quebec City data center as well, right? So that's one of the things that you need to understand about how quickly do we need to get that data back. So that's like the RTO, right? So if Microsoft's data center is gone in Toronto, or the access to it is gone, how do I get my data back, right? And how do I get back up and running, right? And so this way you would shift over to Quebec City, and then Quebec City would launch up your backups or restore your backups from the Quebec City store, right? So again, I want to make sure we're thinking about all of the requirements that you have to keep that application up and running, right? Sorry, guys, I'm talking too much, I guess. Any questions on that?
None in the chat right now, Andy, but anyone from our audience, again, anyone at all, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask away. If not, please reach out to your account manager. We can definitely have those calls afterwards as well.
Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about, yeah, I'm just going to have to speed through a few things here. Some of this we've already talked about, so I'm just running out of time here. So the activity log I mentioned before, right? It gives you the ability to actually understand what is actually happening within the environment, right? And then you can leverage what's happening in the activity log to stand up automations where, for example, if something were to change from your desired configuration and it's been detected in the activity log, you can basically set up an automation process to actually repair that issue, right? So that's all baked in there. You can actually pull out all of your log information and massage it with Power BI. And I basically would recommend anybody download the Power BI desktop tool. It's a fantastic tool, helps you get through spreadsheets and really understand your information really quickly. If you aren't doing it now, the tool's free, so you can download it and just use it. It's a pretty cool tool. So let's talk a little bit Azure Automation. So basically, Azure Automation has the ability to actually reach out to other providers or on-premises environments and actually trigger automated workflows, right? So you can build the automation within Azure, and then basically you have a worker thread that would live within your on-premises environment, and it can actually go back into your environment and actually trigger items to happen within your private cloud environment, right? So items automation is automatically deploying things, automatically resetting a system, automatically like standing up a net new item within your, sorry, I just lost my brain for a sec. Setting up, adding a new VM into your system because you need to scale out, that type of stuff. So we can actually definitely leverage that. And then we can also set it up so that it understands how to actually build a lab environment for you, right? So you can totally replicate the on-premises environment into a lab. So you have it basically exactly the same. You can have the automation tools do that directly for you. I wanted to show you a couple of the dashboards that are happening, right? So this is what you can do with log analytics. You can go in here and look at your security and auditing components, right? So this used to be called, it's an old picture, but it's now called log analytics. And you can get a full view of what's going on in your environment, what's uptime, what's, any issues that are happening, any security problems, all of that stuff. So we're checking all of the things that are going on in your environment and basically giving you a dashboard for that. Okay, so yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of what's going on and how we actually set up a network environment in the cloud. So basically, in the cloud, it's the same as it is on premises, right? So, it's IP is IP, right? So we need subnets and we need subnet masks and we need, load balancing and we need firewalls and, all of the things you need that you have on premises, you need in the cloud, right? So when you're building the cloud, you're building a data center, right? It's not like anything fancy. It's that you need all the same items. They just happen to be provided by the cloud provider, right? You still need a firewall. You still need, all NICs in your machines and all of that. And if you need multiple networks, you need to be able to peer those networks together. So all of these things that are go into building a network on premises are almost identical in the cloud. They just happen to have cloud names versus the on-premises names, right? So Azure networking is very robust. A lot of my clients use only the Microsoft tooling. Like I would say, 80% of my customers use Microsoft tooling only, right? And when it comes to networking, then other people want their public-facing component to be, say, a PAN, because they're using PAN on premises, or they're using a FortiGate, or whatever it is they're using on premises, and they're comfortable with that tool. It's worked well for them. Gives them one console to manage all of their firewalls. Definitely available in Azure. You just have to deploy it and license the item from the manufacturer, right? So again, it's very similar to networking on premises, right? Very, very similar. Let's talk about how can we actually attach to Azure, right? So there's something else we need to think about as part of the base framework of building Azure, right? Are we going to do direct IP over the internet into some sort of web app, right? That's one way to go, right? Are we going to have our end users actually attached to Azure using a point-to-site type connectivity, right? Or are you going to have like developers go in there? As you can see, small-scale deployments you could do this with, right? It's very hard to manage that type of situation for a larger firm. Are we going to do a site-to-site VPN? Right, that's, I would say, again, 80%, no, even more, probably 95% of clients just use VPN between their on-premises environment and the cloud, because the alternative route is too expensive, right? Had a client who set up ExpressRoute, you can see at the bottom here, and for a 1 gig connection, it was costing him $7,000 a month, right? So we need to understand what it is you need from the cloud, how you want to connect to it. And there, as you can see, there's multiple ways to actually connect to it. Nice. Yeah, I got a lot left to go. I talk too much. I'll talk to this.
You can always have a part 2.
Yeah,
I
totally.
do question here though, Andy. Let's get to this, and then we can always have a second series of these, because I do definitely see a lot of interaction from our customers, and I know this is top of mind for a lot of us as well, right? So let's get to this quick question right here from Garnett. So, can you have your failovers out of different geological locations?
Like, yeah, for sure you can. So basically you can set it up so if you have, like, say for example, you've deployed in Azure, and all your systems are running there, and you're creating a disaster recovery site in the secondary Azure data center, for sure. That's definitely doable, right? But you can also set up your on-premises environment to fail over, depending on what item it is, to a different data center as well, right? That there's no limit to that. The really only limit is when you're thinking about your services. The services all need to land in the same data center, right? For performance reasons. It's not like it's not going to work, but yeah, for performance, everything needs to land in the same data center. Did that answer the question?
Wait for Garnett to get back on this. Yes, it did. Thank you, Andy. And then one last question from George here, and then after that, Andy, what we'll do is just quick closing remarks. And to all our customers, apologies for the short time here. Definitely a lot of questions as well, which we really, really appreciate. What we'll do is we'll probably even work on maybe getting a second series or something of the sort out to all of you. But in the meantime, another question from George here, Andy. Can I use Azure's VPN to connect two on-prem networks together?
Two on-prem networks together. Can George come off mute and give me a bit more detail?
If not as well, George, what we can do is we can actually book a secondary call. I'll have David reach out to you, and we can definitely book a call with Andy as well and go into detail. And then as well for anyone else, any of our other customers on the call today, for those of you that do have individual questions and individual insights that you'd like to get answered or get more information on, we are more than happy to help with that and to help answer that. So George just mentioned, so if I have two servers in two different offices, I like to connect them, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, sorry about that. I don't know if I'm being clear, but this VPN option that you're talking about, does it pertain only to VMs that are on the cloud? Or if I have, let's say, a network locally, let's say we're on hybrid and we want to use some type of like VPN service to connect to different offices, can it go through Azure?
Well, yeah, it does. I understand the question. Yeah, sure, you could do that, but you'd have to just think about, latency requirements and things like that, right? Because you are pushing all your traffic to Azure, right? And then back to wherever it needs to go. So in most cases, your best bet is to do a direct connection between the two offices, right? Rather than push it to the cloud. But you definitely could do it through Azure.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So Andy, what we'll do now is just some quick closing remarks. I know we've kind of gone a bit over. I do appreciate all of our customers sticking on the line with us as well as we kind of went over here. Andy, if you want to do some quick closing remarks, and then as I mentioned to all of our customers as well, lots of information to go through, and this is probably one of the most important topics for your business, which we completely understand. We will definitely set up a second series for this. And with that being said, Andy, I shall pass it over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to just say, just as Shoaib just said, that this is the most important part of your Azure deployment, right? So we definitely need to make sure that we wrap all of these things around your core systems that you're building, right? We want to make sure that we know what's going on in the environment. We want to know that my team can only deploy where I need it deployed and where what I want deployed, right? I want to make sure that my security is correct. I want to be able to find items that are running in Azure. All of those things are really not part of your app, right? They're part of the actual Azure framework, and you definitely need to just jump into this and actually start understanding how this works. And our team is very, very good with understanding these and helping customers understand what it is they need to do in this environment. So yeah, give us a call. We'd love to have a one-on-one with you, just to discuss your environment, because everybody's environment's different, right? It's like a snowflake, right? So I'd love to talk to you guys about it.
And I just want to add and really kind of close off with thank you to all of our customers again that joined us here today. I know we didn't get to touch up on everything, but that's always a good thing, because we went through a lot of important information. There's still a lot of important information to go through. Like Andy and I said, we understand this is probably one of the most important aspects of your business. For those of you that do have any additional budding questions, please reach out to your account managers. We'll also send a list internally and have your account managers reach out to you as well. If not, what we'll also work on is a second series for these, judging by the interest in the first one. But other than that, I really appreciate all of you joining in. I want to take a quick moment to thank all of our customers. I want to thank all of our customers that attended and asked questions as well. And we'll be here to support, and we'll be ready to answer any further questions that we can. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, what we'll be doing is you should all receive the gift cards afterwards. As for the raffle, we will be announcing the winner tomorrow morning, and we'll be reaching out with that as well for the Azure free Azure consulting services as well through CDW. Again, everyone, thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it. All of us appreciate it here at CDW, and we're ready to help you with any of your technology problems. Thank you all. Have a great day.